Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Today, we are traveling back in time to the single most significant bad day in the history of our planet. The date is 66,043,000 years ago, give or take a few millennia. For over 150 million years, the Earth has been the domain of giants. The ground trembles under the massive weight of the Argentinosaurus. The sky is sliced by the leathery wings of the Quetzalcoatlus. To anyone watching, this biological architecture seems permanent, unbreakable. Then, in a single, blinding second, it all collapses. A bolide, an asteroid 10 kilometers wide, traveling at 20 kilometers per second, strikes the Yucatan Peninsula. The energy release is almost impossible to comprehend. 100 million megatons of TNT. That is 2 million times more powerful than the most potent nuclear weapon ever detonated by humans. In the immediate radius, life is simply vaporized. A wall of plasma expands outward, followed by a shockwave that flattens forests thousands of kilometers away. But the impact itself was just the beginning. The real horror came after. Ejecta, superheated rock, was lofted into the stratosphere, raining back down globally as trillions of shooting stars, turning the atmosphere into a broiler and igniting wildfires on every single continent. And when the fires finally burned out, the silence began. Vaporized rock and sulfur aerosols choked the sky, plunging the planet into a deep, bruised darkness. Photosynthesis stopped. Temperatures plummeted. The impact winter had begun. Now usually, when we tell this story, we focus on what died. We look at the fossil record, that black line in the rock, and we see the end of the dinosaurs. We see the great metabolic engines of the Mesozoic starving in the cold dark. But today, I want to take you down into the mud of that ruined world. We are going to zoom in past the shattered bones, down to the micrometer scale. Because while the macro world died, the micro world went to war. This is the untold saga of the KPG boundary. It is a story of fungal blooms, of water bears turning to glass, and of the invisible engineers that rebuilt the biosphere from the ashes up. Let's start with the immediate aftermath. The forests are leveled. Billions of tons of animal biomass are rotting. The primary producers, the plants, are failing because the sun is blocked. The food web has collapsed. But there is one kingdom of life that looked at this global catastrophe and saw the greatest feast in history: the fungi. Paleontologists analyzing rock layers from New Zealand to North America have found a strange anomaly right above the impact dust. Pollen grains, the sign of living plants, vanish. In their place is a massive surge in fungal spores. We call this the fungal spike. For a brief, surreal window of time, perhaps a few years or a decade, Earth was not a planet of animals. It was a planet of mushrooms and molds. This was a world of decay. Without the sun, the energy flow of the planet shifted from production to decomposition. The fungi didn't need sunlight, they needed carbon, and the dead world was made of carbon. They broke down the fallen trees and the fallen dinosaurs, releasing nutrients back into the soil, and crucially, they became the life support system for the few remaining plants. In the darkness, vast mycelial networks expanded through the ash-choked soil, acting as a bridge across the abyss, keeping the roots of surviving plants alive through a process called mycoheterotrophy. While the fungi feasted, the animal kingdom faced a binary choice: adapt or die. For the large animals, the choice was made for them. They died. But for the microscopic invertebrates, creatures smaller than a grain of rice, evolution had provided a secret weapon. The impact winter brought extreme cold and, strangely, extreme drought. As water locked up in ice, the land became an arid wasteland. This is where the tardigrade, the rotifer, and the nematode enter the story. These are ancient lineages, and their survival strategy is not flight or fight, it is suspension. They enter a state called cryptobiosis. Imagine a tardigrade in a moss patch. The heat pulse from the impact dries the moss instantly. A human would die. But the tardigrade curls its 8 legs inward, expels the water from its body, and synthesizes a sugar called trehalose. This sugar replaces the water in its cells, turning the cellular fluid into a biological glass. The tardigrade becomes a ton, a dry, lifeless husk. In this state, its metabolism drops to nearly zero. It doesn't eat, breathe, or age. It is effectively a granule of sand that can withstand temperatures near absolute zero. During the impact winter, millions of these microscopic tons lay scattered in the dust, waiting. They were time travelers, skipping the apocalypse by simply pausing their biological clocks. Alongside them were the springtails. These tiny hexapods possessed a different superpower: anti-freeze proteins. As the tropics froze, the springtails didn't need to migrate. Their blood simply wouldn't freeze. They stayed active, grazing on the exploding fungal populations, keeping the soil ecosystem alive while the surface world froze. As the dust slowly settled and the sun began to pierce the gloom, the grip of the fungi loosened. The world was gray, covered in unstable ash. The first plants to reclaim this moonscape were not the flowering trees, but the ferns. We see a dramatic fern spike in the fossil record. Why ferns? Because of how they reproduce. Most trees need heavy seeds or insects to pollinate them. The insects were dead, and heavy seeds couldn't spread across the dead zones. But ferns use microscopic spores. A single fern can release millions of spores into the wind, traveling thousands of kilometers. We have seen this in modern times too. When Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, it created a sterile pumice plain. The first colonizers were not trees, but small, hardy species and biological soil crusts, cyanobacteria, and mosses that wove a sticky web over the ash. In the KPG aftermath, this microskin of the earth allowed the fern gametophytes to thrive. They were the disaster taxa. They specialized in ruin, stabilizing the banks of acid-choked rivers and creating the first shade for the recovering seedlings. But what about the animals that weren't microscopic? How did anything with a backbone survive? The answer lies in the concept of refugia, specifically underground and underwater. If you look at the fossil record, freshwater fish and turtles survived at much higher rates than marine species. This is because freshwater systems run on a detritus loop. When the plants died, dead organic matter washed into the rivers and lakes. This created a glut of food for insect larvae and crayfish, which in turn fed the turtles and fish. Also, deep water doesn't freeze or cool as quickly as air. Life hunkered down in the thermal inertia of the ponds. On land, the survivors were the burrowers. Small mammals and early relatives of marsupials survived because they were fossorial. They lived underground. Just like the pocket gophers that survived Mount St. Helens in their deep burrows, our ancestors survived the fire and the ice by staying beneath the surface. And they didn't just hide. They acted as bioturbitors. By tunneling through the sterile ash, they mixed it with the nutrient-rich soil below, effectively plowing the fields for the future forest. We also have to remember that the KPG world was chemically hostile. The impact released gigatons of sulfur, creating acid rain with a pH similar to battery acid. Heavy metals polluted the soil. To understand how life handled this, we can look at the Chernobyl exclusion zone. After the nuclear disaster, the microbial world adapted with terrifying speed. Scientists have found radiotrophic fungi that use melanin to convert radiation into energy. In the post-impact world, a similar rapid evolution likely took place. Acid-loving bacteria and archaea would have boomed, neutralizing the soil pH and processing the heavy metals. These single-celled organisms were the remediation crew, cleaning up the toxic mess left by the asteroid so that life could return. Finally, we must look at the ocean. For a long time, we thought the oceans remained a wasteland for millions of years. We called it the Strangelove Ocean. But new research shows that while the species diversity crashed, the functional recovery was incredibly fast. Within just 100 years, bacterial blooms appeared. Within 30,000 years, a blink of an eye geologically, the Chicxulub crater itself, ground zero, was teeming with life. The impact had fractured the crust, creating hydrothermal vents. Chemosynthetic bacteria colonized these vents, feeding on chemical energy rather than sunlight. In the open ocean, disaster plankton took over, tiny, opportunistic species that thrived in the chaos. They rebooted the machinery of the ocean, pumping carbon and cycling nutrients long before the complex food webs returned. The world that emerged from the KPG boundary was fundamentally different. The dinosaurs were gone, but the microstructure of the planet had changed. The recovery of the soil nitrogen cycle by microbes paved the way for the angiosperm explosion, the rise of flowering plants and dense rainforests. The survival of decomposers like springtails meant that when the forests grew back, there was something there to break down the leaves and cycle the nutrients. We often view the history of life as a history of kings, the T-Rex, the mammoth, the human. But the KPG extinction teaches us that the true kings of Earth are its smallest inhabitants. When the sky fell, the giants could not hide. They were too big, too hungry, too specialized. But in the soil, in the water, and in the rock, the micro-ecosystem held the line. The fungal hyphae stitched the wounded Earth together. The cyanobacteria glued the ash into soil. The tardigrades slept through the nightmare, guarding the spark of animal life. Life did not just return after the meteor, it never left. It just got very, very small. And when the sun finally broke through the haze, it was these invisible architects who laid the foundation for the world we know today. Thanks for listening to G Fun Facts Online.